My name is Margaret, and I'll never forget the morning my world turned upside down. My husband's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, a little ping that seemed ordinary at first, the kind of noise you barely notice while pouring a cup of coffee. But that message, the one that flashed across the screen, was anything but ordinary. It said we need to talk. And the sender, well, it wasn't listed as baby anymore. It was IRS. I watched his face drain of color, his hand gripping the edge of the table like he needed it to hold him upright. He muttered something under his breath, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. Then right there in our kitchen, he clutched his chest. His eyes went wide, sweat breaking out across his forehead. Seconds later, he collapsed onto the floor. I stood frozen, coffee spilling down my wrist as the mug shook in my trembling hand. The neighbors called the ambulance before I could even open my mouth. Sirens screamed down our quiet suburban street, red and blue lights splashing across the white siding of our house. Paramedics rushed in, their heavy boots stomping across my linoleum floor, their voices urgent. "Ma'am, stand back," one barked. I stood there with my heart hammering, my secret hidden behind a mask of shock. They had no idea what had just happened, no clue that I'd been the one to plant the seed of panic. No one knew that last night I had quietly changed a contact name. Just 4 letters, IRS. That tiny choice had triggered this morning's chaos. But let me back up. The truth is, this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was the result of weeks, maybe months of suspicion gnawing at me. My husband Charles had been distant, secretive. He guarded his phone like a hawk. For 40 years we'd shared everything: grocery lists, passwords, even the occasional embarrassing medical bill. And now he treated that little device like it held the launch codes for nuclear weapons. I'd see him in the living room at night pretending to scroll through news or football scores. But the glow in his eyes wasn't about touchdowns or headlines. It was softer, warmer, the way a man looks when he's speaking to someone he shouldn't. The first time I caught a glimpse, I thought my eyes were deceiving me. The name at the top of the screen read, "Baby." My throat went dry. I remember standing in the doorway pretending to fold a dish towel, my pulse pounding in my ears. Later, alone in the bathroom, I stared at my reflection, the fluorescent light harsh against the lines etched into my face. Baby. That wasn't me. He hadn't called me that in years. Decades, maybe. Somewhere between raising kids, paying mortgages, and battling life's storms, we'd lost the pet names, the playful words. And now he was using them again for someone else. I could have confronted him that night. Could have hurled the phone at his chest and demanded answers. But after 4 decades of marriage, something inside me had shifted. I didn't want a screaming match. I wanted something quieter, sharper. A truth that would slice deeper than any angry words. That's when the idea came. Charles has always been terrified of the IRS. Tax season turned him into a different man, pale, irritable, muttering about audits and forms like a preacher warning about hellfire. Once back in the 90s, we got a letter from the IRS about a missing W-2. It was a minor mistake fixed in a week, but he didn't sleep for days. His greatest fear wasn't death. It wasn't illness. It was the IRS knocking on his door. So when I picked up his phone while he was in the shower, staring at that little heart emoji next to the word baby, I knew exactly what to do. My hands shook, but my heart felt steady. I pressed edit, deleted baby, and typed in IRS. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. 4 letters, that was all. But sometimes 4 letters are enough to shatter a man. That night, I lay in bed next to him, listening to his soft snores, my mind racing. Would she text him tomorrow? Would the message land like a bomb? I imagined his face when he saw IRS light up his phone. I didn't know what words she'd send, but I knew it would be enough. And it was. The next morning when that text came through, "We need to talk," I didn't have to imagine. I saw the bomb explode. His face drained of blood, his chest heaved, he crumpled like a rag doll. Neighbors whispered as the ambulance carried him away. "Poor Charles," one said. "Stress will kill you." Another shook her head. The IRS doesn't mess around. If only they knew. I stood on the porch, clutching my robe around me, playing the role of the worried wife. Inside, though, my mind was a storm. This was just the beginning. Because if Charles thought he could lie to me, build a secret life with baby, and hide behind excuses of business dinners and late nights, he had another thing coming. The ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing. I pressed a hand to my chest and whispered to myself, now it's my turn. Before the sirens and the whispers, before the word audit could stop my husband's heart more effectively than any bullet, our life was on the surface, exactly what folks around here would call nice. We had the white siding and the hydrangeas, the mailbox with our last name in peeling gold letters, the porch swing Charles promised to fix every spring and forgot by summer. On Saturdays, we watered the lawn in our socks, waving to neighbors with a garden hose like a friendly baton. The rhythms of small-town Ohio seeped into us until we hardly noticed them. The noon church bells, the Friday night high school band practicing 3 blocks away, the county fair flyers taped to the post office door with curling edges. We'd been married 40 years. 40. When I say that aloud, people whistle like I've just told them I climbed a mountain. But it didn't feel like summiting a peak. It felt like tending a field day after day, season after season, plowing and planting, pulling stones from the soil, praying the frost would be kind. We raised 2 children in this house and painted their heights in pencil marks along the pantry door. We fought about money and in-laws and how to fold fitted sheets. We celebrated raises with deli cupcakes and sat through funerals holding each other's hands too tightly. It was the ordinary sacredness of a life built plank by plank. If you had dropped by a year ago, you might have found me in the kitchen with flour on my sweater, rolling out pie crusts for the church bake sale, humming along to a crackly FM station that played Sinatra and Patsy Cline. You would have seen Charles on the couch, one leg crossed over the other, reading the paper like a man trying to wrestle the world's problems with a pair of bifocals. He'd clear his throat and read headlines to me, as if I hadn't been listening to the same news all morning. Stocks up, crops down, a new rule about retirement accounts he didn't like. He hated surprises. He hated uncertainty. He loved schedules, labels, and filing cabinets. That was the man I married, dependable as a lamppost. He coached Little League, changed the oil on time, and stacked the winter wood by height. If a neighbor's fence sagged, he brought over a post hole digger and a thermos of coffee. At tax time, he turned into a monk, spreading forms across the dining table in neat constellations, whispering numbers as if they were prayers. When the refund came, he smiled like a boy with a kite. When a letter came, any letter from the Internal Revenue Service, he flinched so hard you'd think someone had slammed a door behind him. We weren't fashionable or wild. We were steady. I cooked our Sunday pot roast in the old blue Dutch oven my mother left me. On Wednesdays, I attended quilting circle in the church basement where the coffee tasted like courage and the gossip was folded into laughter. The other women would lean over their squares and say, "You and Charles, now there's a pair? He's a rock." I would nod because it felt true. He was the ballast that kept me from tipping when life blew sideways. But rocks can hide cracks deep inside them, fissures that only show when the pressure builds. The first hairline, I suppose, was the phone. When the kids were small, the only phone we had was bolted to the wall by the fridge, its cord a coiled snake that always got tangled around a chair. I could tell who was calling by the rhythm of the ring, my sister's quick ring, then hang up, then ring. The dentist's long, patient tone. Now a tiny rectangle told us everything: the weather in Santa Fe, our son's photos from Seattle, the price of eggs, a recipe for lemon bars. I liked mine just fine. It played me old hymns when I walked. But Charles began to hold his like a life raft. It sat face down on the table always. He carried it to the bathroom, to the garage, to the yard. When I asked a question, he told me he was checking sports scores, then turned the screen away so the light didn't reflect in my eyes. A small courtesy, he called it. But it felt like a door closing. Then came the late meetings. He'd been a regional manager for a grocery chain long enough to know that most meetings could have been emails, yet suddenly every Tuesday and Thursday stretched long and thin. Vendor sweetheart, he'd say, pecking my cheek. Supply chain's a mess. He smelled different when he came home, less like copier paper and more like something foreign and sweet, a scent with a top note I couldn't place. He'd loosen his tie and pretend he wanted to talk, but his eyes slipped past me to his phone charging by the outlet. I tried to be generous. Marriage isn't made of cross-examination. It's made of choosing to let small things pass because you promise to pick each other up when the big things fall. I told myself not to read into it, not to become a woman who checks pockets and sniff tests collars. I baked muffins for his meetings and ironed his shirts, and laughed at his careful jokes even when they missed the plate. But the ledger of little oddities began to add up. A credit card charge at a restaurant we'd never visited, 2 entrees, a bottle of Pinot Noir. He doesn't drink Pinot Noir, I thought, folding the receipt into my purse like a thorn. An Uber ride to a neighborhood where none of our clients lived. A second bottle of cologne tucked into his overnight bag, though he claimed he never stayed in hotels. The night I first saw the name on his phone, it was rain-silvered and quiet. The band was practicing down the street, drums a steady heartbeat, a trumpet cutting through like a bright string. I was wiping counters when the phone lit up face up for once, a little oversight from a man who rarely made them. Baby. The words floated on the screen like a wink. For a moment my brain short-circuited as if I'd accidentally read a sentence in a language I didn't know. My hands kept moving circles with the dishcloth, calm as a nurse, but I felt the floor tilt just a degree, enough to make me reach for the island. I waited. I have always believed that time reveals what temper conceals. An hour later he shuffled in, cleared his throat, and said something about a broken refrigeration unit at the North Store. He kissed my hair, thanked me for the meatloaf, carried his plate to the sink, and whistled a tune I recognized from our wedding reception. He was a man in costume, and I had finally learned to notice the seams. That night, sleep would not come. The house clicked and sighed around me like an old friend with a new secret. I listened to the rain finger-tap the gutters and thought about the women in my quilting circle, how they'd tell me to pray, to wait, to be wise. Wisdom, I decided, was the opposite of panic. It wasn't screaming in the driveway or throwing plates. It was observation. It was patience. It was telling the truth to myself first. In the gray before dawn, I came to the kitchen and made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The steam rose like a benediction I didn't feel. I laid out the mail, wiped the crumb tray clean, straightened the stack of church bulletins. The small orderliness of it settled my hands, if not my heart. We say vows once at 20 or 30 when we think love is a blue sky guaranteed. No one tells you that you have to say them again in the mirror decades later to the tired woman looking back. I don't know what will happen, I told her silently, but I will not lie to myself. And so the ground beneath me began to shift, not enough to send me tumbling, just enough to make me plant my feet wider, brace my shoulders, and decide that if a storm was coming, I would meet it standing up. It wasn't just the name on his phone. By then I'd been seeing shadows for months, each one a whisper that told me something was wrong, even when I tried to pretend otherwise. A marriage that has lasted 4 decades has a rhythm like an old song you don't need to hear to know the words. And when that rhythm shifts even slightly, you feel it in your bones. Charles was a creature of habit. He left his shoes by the back door, always in the same spot. He folded his undershirts into perfect squares, lined up like soldiers in the drawer. He ordered black coffee, never cream or sugar. But slowly I began to notice the variations, little improvisations in his steady tune. His shoes were left in the den, one toppled on its side. His undershirts unfolded, tossed in like laundry meant to be hidden. And one morning I found a flavored creamer in the fridge, hazelnut. He despised hazelnut, but suddenly it was there, half empty. There were receipts too. I wasn't looking for them, but they turned up like guilty weeds. A steakhouse in Cincinnati, though he claimed he'd been in Dayton that night. A boutique wine shop receipt tucked into his jacket pocket, Cabernet Sauvignon, the very bottle he once bought me for our 10th anniversary, a wine I remembered sipping while we danced in our small living room under twinkle lights. That memory turned sour in my mouth. He hadn't bought me a bottle in years. Who then was he buying it for now? I remember one evening in particular. He came home smelling of perfume, not mine, not anything I'd ever worn. It was light floral, too young for me. It clung to his collar like a neon sign. I leaned in as he kissed me, my stomach twisting. "New air freshener in the office," he said quickly, his eyes darting away. A lie so weak it almost insulted me more than the scent itself. And then came the nights he guarded his phone like a crown jewel. At dinner, he used to place it beside his fork the way some men put down their pocket knives. Now, it never left his side. He kept it in his pocket even when we sat down to supper. He slept with it under his pillow as though afraid it might reveal his secrets in the dark. I told myself not to pry. We women of my generation were raised to be polite, to mind our business, to keep the home warm and the soup simmering. But politeness doesn't erase intuition. And mine was screaming. It all came to a head one rainy Thursday. The windows streaked with water, the gutters gurgling like tired throats. I had baked a pie for my quilting circle and was setting it on the counter to cool. Charles had left his phone charging by mistake. The screen lit up, casting a glow across the kitchen. And there it was again, baby. The words burned. I froze, one hand still on the pie plate. My pulse roared in my ears. I didn't dare touch the phone, though every cell in my body ached to open the message. Instead, I stared at that name until it blurred. 40 years, and he hadn't called me baby in at least 30. Not since the kids were in grade school and we were too tired to flirt. Somewhere along the way, that word had died between us. And now it had been resurrected for someone else. I sat down at the kitchen table, my knees trembling, and listened to the rain drum on the roof. I thought of all the little moments I had brushed aside, the cologne, the creamer, the lies about meetings. They lined up in my mind like dominoes, each one falling into the next, forming a pattern I couldn't ignore. That night, I watched him. He came home late. His tie crooked, his smile thin. He hugged me, but his arms felt loose, like a man hugging a neighbor instead of a wife. He said something about long negotiations and supply shortages. Then he poured himself a drink he didn't finish. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in 40 years, I realized I didn't know the man standing in front of me. I could have asked him then. Could have cornered him in the hallway, demanded to know who baby was. But what would he have said? He would have lied as easily as he breathed. No, confrontation wasn't the answer. Instead, as he showered, I picked up his phone. My hands trembled, but my heart was steady. I opened the contact list, found the name, and pressed edit. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Baby blinked at me, bold and smug. I deleted it. One by one, the letters vanished. And then carefully, I typed 4 new ones, IRS. I don't know if I smiled, but I know my chest felt lighter than it had in months. I set the phone back exactly as I'd found it. Then I climbed into bed beside him, pulling the quilt up to my chin, and listened to the sound of the shower stop, the bathroom door creak, the mattress dip under his weight. He lay down and turned his back to me. Within minutes, he was snoring softly, the rhythm of a man untroubled, a man who thought his secrets were safe. I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, the rain still tapping at the glass. In that moment, I made a choice. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not let him see my pain. I would let him undo himself with a little help from me. Because sometimes the sharpest weapon a woman can wield isn't her voice. It's her silence. And the quiet, deliberate turning of a key. Tomorrow his phone would ring again. Tomorrow, baby would become IRS. Tomorrow, the cracks in our rock would split wide open. The next morning dawned cold and gray, the kind of morning where the sky feels like a heavy wool blanket pressing down. I stood in the kitchen stirring sugar into my coffee, though I could barely taste it. My nerves hummed like live wires beneath my skin. Charles shuffled in his slippers, dragging across the linoleum, his hair sticking up in tufts. He looked every bit the weary husband I'd shared a bed with for 40 years, and yet I knew something was about to break him in a way I'd never seen before. He reached for the coffee pot, yawning. His phone sat on the counter, charging, the screen dark. I watched him pour his cup slow and steady, and then set the pot down with the precision of a man who craved order. That order was about to unravel. The buzz came sharp and sudden. His phone lit up, vibrating against the countertop like a rattlesnake ready to strike. Charles froze coffee halfway to his lips. His eyes darted to the screen. I followed his gaze, pretending not to, though my heart pounded so loud I swore he could hear it. On the screen in bold letters it said IRS. And beneath it, "We need to talk." For a moment he didn't move. His hand trembled, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. His face went slack, then pale, so pale it looked like the blood had drained right out of him. "Oh God," he whispered. The mug clattered onto the counter, coffee splashing across the surface, dripping onto the floor. He grabbed the phone, swiping at the message with frantic fingers, muttering, "No, no, no." I stood still, clutching my own mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. "What is it?" I asked softly, my voice carrying the perfect note of concern. He didn't answer. He sank into a chair, one hand clutching his chest, the other gripping the phone as though it were a live grenade. His breathing turned shallow, quick, each inhale whistling like a broken accordion. Charles the Washishaisi stepped closer, my heart pounding for reasons far different than his. "Are you all right?" His lips moved soundlessly. Finally he gasped, "They know. Oh God, they know." I almost laughed, almost. But the sight of him hunched and trembling made even my satisfaction taste bitter. His forehead glistened with sweat, his shirt clinging to his chest. He looked older than I had ever seen him, a fragile man suddenly stripped of all his bravado. Then he groaned, a guttural sound that rose from deep inside. His eyes rolled back, his body convulsed, and in one horrifying instant he toppled sideways, collapsing onto the kitchen floor. Charles II then cried, though my voice cracked with a strange blend of shock and something darker. I knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his clammy forehead. His chest heaved beneath my palm, his heartbeat frantic and uneven. Neighbors would later say they heard me screaming, but in truth I don't remember screaming. I remember silence. A thick, suffocating silence as I stared at the man who had betrayed me, now laid low by a trick as small and sharp as a needle. The doorbell rang. Mrs. Peterson from next door had heard the crash of the mug and hurried over. When she saw Charles on the floor, she gasped and ran back out, yelling for someone to call 911. Within minutes, the wail of sirens cut through the morning stillness, red and blue lights bouncing off the windows like a carnival gone wrong. Paramedics stormed into my kitchen, their boots loud, their hands efficient. They worked over him in a blur, checking his pulse, lifting his head, calling out numbers I didn't understand. I stood back, arms folded around myself, trembling. One of them glanced up at me. "Ma'am, did he complain of chest pain?" "Yes," I whispered. He just said they knew." "They?" the paramedic asked, frowning. I shook my head, feigning confusion. I don't know. I don't know what he meant." They hoisted him onto a stretcher, the wheels rattling over the threshold. The neighbors had gathered by then, clustering in little knots of gossip on the sidewalk. I heard murmurs. "Was it his heart? Stress'll do that to a man. The IRS doesn't play around." I kept my face composed, my voice trembling in just the right way. "Please," I begged the paramedics, "save him." The ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren wailed, carrying Charles away. I stood on the porch, robe clutched tight against the wind, watching the vehicle shrink into the distance. Behind me, the house smelled of spilt coffee and panic. Inside, I returned to the kitchen. His phone still lay on the counter, abandoned in the chaos. The screen had gone dark again, but I knew what it had said. IRS. We need to talk. 4 simple words, but enough to rip the mask off his carefully ordered life. I sat at the table, staring at the faint outline of his coffee mug on the wood, a ring left behind like a scar. For 40 years he had controlled the narrative of our marriage, what was said, what was hidden, what was endured. But today I had seized the pen. Today I had written a new chapter. And it was only the beginning. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. I walked through the automatic doors with my heart thudding, the cold air from the vents raising goosebumps on my arms. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting everything in a sterile glow. Nurses in scrubs moved briskly, their shoes squeaking on linoleum. The world felt mechanical, efficient humming with a purpose that had nothing to do with me, but everything to do with the man they had just wheeled into a room with wires strapped to his chest. Charles had suffered what they called a cardiac episode. Not quite a full heart attack, but not a fainting spell either. It was a warning, the doctor said, a warning his body had been whispering for months, maybe years. High blood pressure, stress, hidden anxieties that can carve away at a man like termites in wood. He's stable for now, the doctor told me, his voice calm but firm. But he'll need rest, monitoring, maybe a change of lifestyle. Less stress. No heavy shocks. I nodded, lips pressed tight. I thought about the message that had triggered it, all 4 words on a glowing screen. We need to talk. It wasn't a heavy shock in the usual sense. It was worse. It was a scalpel slicing straight into his deepest fear. When they finally let me into his room, Charles lay pale against the white sheets, his face lined and weary. Tubes snaked into his arm, a monitor beeped steadily by his side. His eyes fluttered open when I entered, and for a moment he looked like a boy, vulnerable and small. "Juliet," he rasped, his voice cracked. "It's all coming down. They're coming for me." I stepped closer, laying a hand on his arm. "Who's coming for you, Charles?" "The IRS," he whispered, eyes wide and frantic. "They know. They found out." "Oh God, Juliet, what am I going to do?" I tilted my head, feigning confusion. "What did they find out, Charles?" He shook his head violently, then winced in pain. I can't say. Just know it's bad. I tried to keep it from you, I really did. I didn't want you dragged into this mess." His words were a confession disguised as protection. He thought he was shielding me, but what he didn't know was that I already understood more than he realized. I had seen the perfume stains, the receipts, the late-night messages. His mess wasn't just financial. It was personal, intimate, dripping with betrayal. I squeezed his hand, lowering my voice to a gentle hush. "Rest now. We'll figure it out." But my mind wasn't resting. My mind was racing. The next day, while he dozed under the hum of machines, I began my own quiet investigation. I wasn't looking for auditors or accountants. I was looking for truth. At home, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, the same table where I had written grocery lists and birthday cards for decades. Only now I wrote down everything I had observed, the receipts, the perfume, the late-night meetings, the messages. I sketched arrows between clues, building a map of deceit. I picked up his phone again, my fingers steady this time. I scrolled through messages, but he was careful, too careful. There were no incriminating texts, no obvious evidence. It was as if he had scrubbed it clean, leaving only a ghostly trail. But ghosts leave footprints. His call log showed a number repeated often, a string of digits without a name attached. I dialed it from my own phone, heart pounding. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a woman's voice answered, light and lilting. "Hello." I hung up, my throat tight. That voice was not businesslike. It was warm, intimate, expectant. I jotted the number down, circling it hard enough to dent the page. Back at the hospital, Charles tried to make small talk, but his eyes betrayed him. He avoided my gaze, his hands twitching as though he longed to check his phone. "I'm sorry," he murmured one evening, his voice trembling. "I never wanted you to get hurt." "Then tell me the truth," I said softly but firmly. He swallowed his Adam's apple, bobbing. "There are things I can't say. Things that would ruin us both." I leaned closer, brushing his hair back from his forehead like I used to when he came home tired from work. "Charles, nothing ruins us except lies." He closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. But he said nothing more. That silence spoke louder than any confession. I wasn't alone in my suspicion. Mrs. Peterson, who had witnessed the ambulance arrive, stopped by with a casserole the next afternoon. She set it on my counter, her eyes searching mine. "Juliet," she said quietly, "people are talking. About Charles. About other women." I stiffened, but I kept my voice steady. "What exactly are they saying?" "That he's been seen in town. With someone who isn't you. At the steakhouse. At the hotel by the highway. Folks don't want to believe it, but—" She sighed, shaking her head. 40 years of marriage, and this is how he repays you." Her words struck like a hammer, but I had already built armor around my heart. I simply nodded, thanked her for the casserole, and closed the door. But inside, the truth hardened into something sharp. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't paranoid. My suspicions had roots, and they were spreading fast. That night, I sat alone in our bedroom, the glow of the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. I opened my notebook again and wrote a single sentence. "He thinks the IRS is after him, but it's me." Because what Charles didn't understand was that I had stopped being his shield. I had become his reckoning. The investigation wasn't just about catching him in a lie. It was about reclaiming 40 years of silence, 40 years of compromise, 40 years of being the wife who smoothed over rough edges. Now I was the edge, and I was done being smoothed. I will never forget the evening the threads of Charles's secret finally began to unravel in front of me. It was late a Tuesday, the kind of quiet night when the whole neighborhood seemed to be tucked into bed by 9. I sat in the living room with the television muted, the flickering light bouncing across the walls, but my mind wasn't on the screen. I was waiting, listening for the sound of his phone. When it buzzed, it was faint, muffled by the quilt on the recliner where he'd absent-mindedly tossed it. I slid it out carefully, as though it were a sleeping baby I didn't want to wake. The screen lit up in my hand, and there it was, the same number I'd written in my notebook, the one with no name, the one that carried a woman's voice. This time there was a message. "Miss you already?" My breath caught in my throat. I stared at it, the red heart glowing like a wound. For a moment I couldn't move. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to steady them. I snapped a photo with my own phone evidence for the folder I was building. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. The next day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit at home waiting for crumbs of the truth. I was going to dig. I pulled out the number again and called Mrs. Miller, an old friend who worked part-time at the phone company before she retired. She owed me a favor from years ago when I helped her through a rough patch. "Margaret," she said after I explained, her voice hushed, "are you sure you want to know?" "I need to," I replied. 40 years of marriage deserves the truth." There was a pause, a sigh, then the sound of fingers tapping a keyboard. The numbers registered to a woman named Diane Matthews. Lives 2 towns over. About 10 years younger than you from the records. That's all I can give you. I thanked her, my voice thick with something between rage and relief. Diane Matthews. A name at last. Not just a faceless shadow. That night, I looked at Charles across the dinner table. He picked at his food, his eyes distant. The lines on his face seemed deeper, etched with worry. "How was work?" I asked, my tone light, almost casual. "Long," he muttered. "Meetings. More than I can count." "Meetings in town," I pressed gently. He froze for half a beat too long before nodding. "Of course." That hesitation told me everything. A few days later, I followed him. I told him I had errands in the city, but instead, I parked my car 2 blocks away from the hotel by the highway. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and every car that pulled in made me hold my breath. Then I saw it. His old SUV. He stepped out, smoothed his jacket, and looked around as though he were checking for ghosts. Then she appeared. Diane. She was younger, yes, but not young. Blonde hair in a neat bob, a bright scarf knotted around her neck heels clicking against the pavement. She laughed as she leaned toward him, her hand brushing his arm. The sight of them together was like a dagger to my chest. 40 years of history, birthdays, funerals, Sunday dinners reduced to this cheap rendezvous in a roadside hotel. I raised my phone and snapped photos. My hands were shaking, but I held steady enough. Frame after frame capturing the truth he thought he could bury. That night, while he snored beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every memory flickered through my mind like an old film reel. The time he held me when my father died. The way he cheered when our son graduated. The nights we danced barefoot in the kitchen. Were those moments real? Or had they all been tainted by this man who now slipped away to meet Diane Matthews? The ache in my chest was unbearable, but beneath it a fire burned. This wasn't going to break me. This was going to forge me. The following week, I met with a private investigator. His name was Thomas, a man recommended by Mrs. Miller, short, stout, with eyes that missed nothing. I handed him the photos, the screenshots, the notes in my notebook. I need everything, I told him. Where he goes, who he's with, what they say. Leave no stone unturned. Thomas nodded, flipping through the evidence with a steady hand. I'll get you the truth, Mrs. Roberts, but be prepared. The truth isn't always kind. I don't need kindness, I said firmly. I need facts. And so the hunt began. Over the next days, Thomas sent me updates. Photos of Charles and Diane at restaurants, walking arm in arm through shops, laughing together like teenagers. One photo cut me deepest: Charles, holding a bouquet of flowers, the very same kind he used to bring me once a year on our anniversary. I stared at that picture for a long time, the colors blurring through my tears. Then I printed it out, slid it into my folder, and wrote beneath it in bold letters, "For her, not me." The final crack came when Thomas sent a short audio recording. He'd bugged the corner of a cafe where they met. Charles's voice low and trembling. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Juliet suspects something. And Diane's laughter light and cruel. She's just an old woman stuck in the past. She'll never do anything. She doesn't have it in her. My blood turned to ice. Old woman. She thought I was weak, that I would sit quietly knitting in the corner while they burned down my life. She had no idea who she was underestimating. That night, I closed the folder, placed it in the drawer beneath the family Bible, and locked it shut. I stood in the silence of the house, my reflection in the window staring back at me with new eyes. The truth was no longer hidden. It was mine. And now it was time to decide what to do with it. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen, painting the walls gold, but to me it felt harsh, exposing like a spotlight before the curtain rises. I sat at the table with a cup of black coffee, the steam curling upward, carrying with it the weight of 40 years. In front of me lay the folder, my arsenal of truth. Screenshots, photographs, notes, an audio file on a flash drive. Evidence that my husband, the man who once swore under a San Diego sky to love me forever, had betrayed me. I wasn't trembling anymore. My hands were steady as I opened the folder one last time, the papers crisp, the photos glossy. Diane's smiling face, Charles's guilty expression, his flowers in another woman's hands. Each page was a dagger, and I had sharpened them to a fine point. When Charles shuffled in his slippers, scuffing the floor, I didn't look up immediately. I let the silence stretch heavy and thick until he cleared his throat. "Morning," he muttered. I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Sit." Something in my tone made him obey without protest. He lowered himself slowly, his eyes flickering from my face to the folder between us. "What's this?" he asked, his voice already brittle. I slid the first photo across the table, him and Diane entering the hotel. His face drained of color, his hand twitched as though he wanted to push it away. "Juliet," he began. I interrupted, my voice calm, almost gentle. Don't you dare insult me with lies." I laid out another photo, him holding the bouquet. Then the screenshot of "Miss You already." Then finally, the audio recording on my phone, his voice whispering about me, her laugh calling me an old woman. I pressed play, the sound filling the kitchen. When it ended, silence crashed down heavier than any thunder. His mouth opened, then closed. His shoulders sagged. "I never meant." "You never meant to get caught," I said sharply. My voice surprised me. It was strong, steady, like the woman I used to be before compromise and silence dulled my edges. "You've been lying to me, Charles, for months, maybe years. And you thought I was too blind, too weak, too old to notice." He buried his face in his hands. "I was stupid. She doesn't mean anything. You're my wife." I almost laughed, but the sound died in my throat. "She doesn't mean anything. You risked everything for nothing. Do you even hear yourself?" He reached across the table, but I pulled my hands back. I wouldn't let his touch rewrite the truth. 40 years, I whispered. 40 years of my life, my loyalty, my love. And this is what you give me in return. Tears slid down his cheeks, but they didn't move me. Not anymore. "I'll make it right," he pleaded. "I'll end it. I cut him off. "You already ended it. The moment you let her into your life, into your heart, into our story, you ended us. And now, Charles, I'm ending the charade." I stood, gathering the folder into my arms like a shield. I'm not the old woman she thinks I am. I am the wife who built this family, the woman who carried this marriage, and the only reason you've lived in peace this long. But that ends today. He slumped in his chair, defeated, as I walked out. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers' paperwork and whispered gossip in the neighborhood. Some looked at me with pity, others with admiration. "You're so strong, Juliet," Mrs. Peterson told me one afternoon, her eyes glistening. Most women would crumble. But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow. Nights were the worst, lying alone in the bed where we'd once whispered dreams, now listening only to the echo of betrayal. But slowly I found pieces of myself again, in the bakery, in long walks under the sun, in the laughter of my son Daniel, who stood by me through every step. One Sunday morning, as I pulled a tray of flan from the oven, I caught my reflection in the bakery window. My hair was silver, my face lined, but my eyes were alive, fierce. I realized then that betrayal hadn't broken me. It had revealed me. Charles lost more than a wife. He lost the woman who carried him, the home we built, the respect of his family, and the dignity he once had. Diane. She was nothing more than a passing storm. But me, I remained. Now, as I share this story, I'm not looking for pity. I'm offering a mirror. Maybe you've been where I was, suspecting, doubting, afraid of the truth. Maybe you're still there now. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: you are stronger than the lies you've been told. You are braver than the silence you've endured. And you are worth more than crumbs of affection thrown from the hands of a betrayer. I reclaimed myself the day I stopped protecting Charles's secrets and started protecting my own peace. And if I can do it after 40 years, you can too. Thank you for listening, for walking through this storm with me. If my story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave me a comment, tell me where you're listening from, how far my words have traveled. And if you want to hear more stories of strength, betrayal, and survival, subscribe. This isn't just my story, it's ours. With love from a woman who finally chose herself.